This is Community Ecology. If you're using the Raven Biology textbook, this is Chapter 57. When you're studying population ecology, you're looking at how the individuals in the population interact with each other and how they interact with the abiotic or non-living part of the world. If you're looking at community ecology, you're looking at the same thing, but instead of a single population, you have multiple populations. So in essence, you're looking at how well individual populations interact with each other and how well they share their environment. A community is characterized by species diversity and primary productivity. The more animals you have, or the more plants you have, the more species you have, the more diverse your community is, and the stronger it is. The same thing with the actual amount of plants. Since plants are the foundation of any community, the more plants you have and the higher quality of those plants, the stronger your community is. When we look at the community, the first thing we have to do is look at the individual organisms. Because scientists love to organize things, these organisms are characterized by what they eat. You know these terms already, but we'll go over them anyway. An autotroph is something that makes its own food chemically. You know them as the plants. Heterotrophs are anything that have to consume something else in order to gain food. Heterotrophs are divided into three categories. The primary consumers are the ones that you know as herbivores. They're the ones that eat the plants. Secondary consumers eat the herbivores. You'll see those on Animal Planet as the lions and tigers. And tertiary consumers will actually eat other consumers. There aren't a lot of tertiary consumers on the land in terms of animals. You'll see them a lot in the oceans because the food webs in the oceans are very complex, and you'll also see them in the smaller organisms like the insects, again because everything is very, very small and you can have complex food webs. The animals in the middle are too large and the resources are too limited to have too many tertiary consumers. When we look at the trophic pyramid, we're going to look at the placement of the organisms and the energy that they gain when they eat. First, I want to tie it to what I just told you. At the bottom are the producers, also known as primary productivity. That's the plant energy. First level consumers are the primary consumers. They're the herbivores that are going to eat the plants. The second level consumers are the carnivores that eat the herbivores. And the top level consumers are our tertiary consumers, the one that I said eat both the herbivores and the carnivores. Outside of the pyramid, you will find the cleanup crew, the scavengers and the detritivores. The scavengers will eat the pieces of meat that were too small when the carnivore made the kill, the fur, the tendons, and the ligaments. The detritivores eat the parts that are even too small for the scavengers, the bits of scales, the bits of fur. They will also eat animal waste and the parts that were discarded, shed fur and lost claws. If you look at the trophic pyramid in terms of energy, we're going to actually redefine. So the first trophic level are the primary consumers, the second trophic level are the secondary consumers, and the third trophic level are the tertiary consumers. The producers are not considered when we're looking at energy. So the producers create all of the energy, and if you look at my picture, we start out at 1,000 units. It's just a random number that was chosen. The grasshoppers that eat that grass only get 100 units. So where did the rest of it go? It's called the rule of 10, that you only get 10% of the energy that was available for your own personal use. The other 90% was spent in actually getting that energy. So in the instance of the grasshoppers, they had to hop over to the food, which cost energy. They had to chew it, they had to swallow it, they had to digest it. All of that is wasted energy that wasn't actually taken in by the body. This seems to work all the way up the trophic levels. So when you get to the top, they only get 1 unit of energy per organism that they eat, which means that they have to eat a lot of food in order to survive. When food chains or food webs fall apart, it's the tertiary consumers or the third trophic level organisms that hurt the first, because they have so much energy that they need and so much food that they need to catch in order to meet that need. So if the trophic levels fall apart below them, they're the first ones to realize that there's an issue. Another way that biologists organize individuals in a community is by their niche. You'll also hear it called niche. This is their way of life or their role in the ecosystem. Are they an herbivore or are they a carnivore? Do they burrow into the ground? Do they use grass for nesting material? All the different ways that they interact and change their environment because of their presence is technically their niche. There are 2 types of niches: the fundamental niche and the realized niche. Your fundamental niche is a perfect world. There is no competition from resources from anybody. Nobody in your population, nobody in a different population. The realized niche is the actual real world. This is based on all the different types of competition. A fundamental niche, you have the best amount of food, the best amount of water, the best living space. The realized niche is a combination of both. You may have a great food source, but maybe a secondary nesting site. It all depends on the competition. All living things have found ways to avoid competition and increase the size of their realized niche. It's often called resource partitioning. It's a way that they share their environment with others in their community. You can have morphological resource partitioning. This, as you know, is an actual change in physical structure. Again, I've shown my Mexican free-tail bat because we talked about the size of their nose in comparison to their food source. No other bats have that shape, and so they don't have to share that food source. You can have a temporal resource partitioning, means it's a time change. So my example is an owl. Owls hunt at night, so they don't have to share their resources with raptors who hunt during the day. And then there's spatial partitioning. Where do you find your food? So my picture is a picture of anoles. There are some who hunt and live at the top of the tree, some in the middle on the actual trunk, and some at the bottom. Again, because they're spaced out, they don't have to share those resources with anyone else. By doing so, their realized niche is enlarged and they have more resources for themselves. Coevolution is when one species evolves and another evolves in response. This happens quite often in the relationships between a predator and its prey. The predator adapts and evolves to become a successful hunter. The prey, in return, adapts and responds to be successful in getting away. As the prey improves its escape techniques, the predator has to improve its attack or hunting techniques, or it will go hungry. This back and forth play between learning and improving and learning and improving is a form of coevolution. My picture is an example of coevolution. It's between the monarch butterfly caterpillar and the milkweed plant. The milkweed plant has developed a toxin to keep it from being eaten, so everything that would nibble on it will be sick, or at least have a really bad taste in their mouth. The monarch butterfly caterpillar has actually evolved to be able to eat that toxin, eat that plant, and not be harmed in any way. In addition, it incorporates that toxin into its own cells, so when it turns into a butterfly, it's poisonous. So that means that when it gets eaten, the bird that eats it gets sick. Now, it doesn't save that initial insect, but it will teach the bird not to eat others that look like it, and so its species is improved. So we have an opportunity to see coevolution. As the plant changed, the monarch butterfly caterpillar also changed. Another way that organisms interact with their environment is this idea of mimicry. It's used by both predators and prey. Mimicry simply means that an organism has evolved to look or act like another. It can be an inanimate object like a stick or a rock, or it can be another living thing or a part of a living thing. If an organism looks like an inanimate object, taking on the color or the texture of something specifically to hide, it's called camouflage. If it has bright stripes or bright spots or some kind of a bright color, it's called warning coloration or aposematic coloration. This is basically a warning to anybody who might want to munch on it for lunch that says, I am venomous, I am dangerous, you want to leave me alone. One example of camouflage mimicry is Batesian mimicry. In this case, a harmless species has evolved to imitate the warning signs of a harmful species. So in other words, we've got an insect that doesn't have any kind of venom, but has developed all of the shapes and all of the colors of a cousin that actually is venomous. So if you look at my picture, we have a wasp that's bright yellow, bright black, striped, gives all the warning signs. It says, I am poisonous. And we've got a moth that has relatively the same shape, but it's got the bright yellow and black stripes. So it's mimicked those aposematic colorizations. So what happens is the predator will eat one of the poisonous wasps, get stung, remember the pain, and when it encounters the moth, it will recognize that vague colorization, that pattern, and will leave the moth alone. So in this case, the moth gets all of the benefits of having the poison, but none of the costs of actually having to make it. Mullerian mimicry is similar, except in this case we have two or more poisonous species that mimic each other's warning signs with the desire to scare off a larger number of predators. So in other words, if I'm brightly colored, I'll scare off my own predators. If I look like you, I will not only scare off my predators, but I'll also scare off yours as well. So I get 2 times the amount of predator protection for a single type of colorization. The process works the same as Batesian mimicry. If a predator has already learned to avoid one species, it will avoid all the others that look similar. Another way that species in the same community interacts is the idea of symbiosis. Symbiosis is 2 or more kinds of organisms that interact in a more or less permanent relationship. Symbiosis often happens as a result of coevolution. There are 3 types of symbiosis. The first type is called commensalism. In commensalism, one organism benefits while the other is neither harmed nor helped. My example is Spanish moss on a tree. That's the stuff that you see in all the horror movies that hangs down from the trees and makes everything look really scary. The moth takes in water as water vapor from the atmosphere. So being high up in the tree helps it because that's where more water vapor is. So it gains more moisture the higher up it is. The moth doesn't actually attach itself to the tree in any way, so the tree isn't harmed. It also doesn't provide any benefit to the tree, so the tree isn't helped. The second form is mutualism. In this case, both organisms are helped. My picture is ants on an acacia tree. The ants build a nest in the acacia trees, and they consume the sap that's on the inside. That is their only food source, and because of that, they will defend the tree as their territory. So they benefit through the addition of food and a home. The tree is protected from animals that will browse on it because the ants will actually sting anyone that comes near. So the tree gets protection in this relationship. And the final is parasitism. In this, one organism is helped while the other, the host, is harmed. The host may be harmed for a short time, like a tick, or it's sometimes even killed. My example is the left, the mistletoe. We see it at Christmas time as this cool thing that you hang up and then you get kissed under. But mistletoe actually grows its roots into the bark of the tree. It uses that way to consume the sap for food and the water. By opening up the bark, the tree becomes susceptible to bacteria and burrowing insects, so the tree is actually harmed. If there's a lot of mistletoe, the tree can actually be killed. The last thing that I want to talk about is the way communities are actually created, and that's through the process of succession. Succession is the process of change in the structure of the species found in a community over time. Succession happens usually as the result of some sort of disturbance. When you have succession, we always begin with plants, and then the animals will come in later because, as you know, plants are the basis of all the food chains and all the food webs. There are two types of succession. The difference is based on the starting point. Primary succession, the gradual return of a habitat or ecosystem after a catastrophic event, begins on ground that has no soil. And that's because the soil has been completely removed or covered. So we're looking at things like landslides and lava flows. Primary succession will always lead to secondary succession. Secondary succession is the gradual return of a habitat or ecosystem after a normal, non-catastrophic disturbance. Secondary succession begins on ground that still has soil, but has had the vegetation removed, like a forest fire or a flood. Since the soil has seeds and roots in it, the plant life will regrow very quickly. Secondary succession will end when the plant and animal life in that community fits the abiotic environment. This situation is called a climax community. We're going to begin with the idea of primary succession. Primary succession begins on that totally soilless rock that I just mentioned. If you've been to Hawaii and you've seen the lava flows, you've seen the beginning of primary succession. The seeds of grasses and flowers are going to blow in, or they're going to be carried in on the fur of animals that are passing through. Only the toughest seeds are actually going to be able to grow because they have to have really tough roots that can break through that rock. As the plant roots grow, the rock is going to be broken into smaller and smaller pieces. As the plants die, they'll decompose and add nutrients to the soil. As the soil develops both in quality and in depth, the more sensitive plant seeds can grow, and we're going to increase the number of actual plant species. Over time, the nutrients will keep improving, the depth will keep increasing, and we'll have enough soil that we can begin to have small shrubs. The shrubs will be replaced by small trees. Those trees are usually some form of pine, because pine trees are more tolerant of poor, shallow soils. Once they have improved the soil enough, then other trees like maples and oaks will come in and take their place. Again, once all of the plants have fit into the abiotic community, you have a climax community. Secondary succession works exactly the same way as primary succession does, but we're not starting on bare rock. We already have soil, we already have seeds, we already have roots. So really secondary succession is in essence the beginning of spring. We're just waiting for the plants to grow. The communities that you have at the end of succession may not be exactly like they were before because we have open spaces for new species to come in. So even in secondary succession, where we have seeds and roots already in place, there is a time where the soil is bare and new species can come in and take over those places that they weren't able to get into before. For a long time, scientists thought that disturbance was a bad thing, that every ecosystem should be allowed to reach the climax community state. Over time, they realized that that was actually wrong. If you have a climax community, you have a very limited number of species because they're fit into that environment. If you have a limited number of plant species, you have a limited number of animal species. The same thing goes in reverse. If you have a habitat that's been disturbed over and over and over again, it never actually has an opportunity to recover, with again a very limited number of plants and a limited number of animals. But if you can get somewhere in the middle, where you have a moderate amount of disturbance, you have the plants that like the new areas still in there, and you like the plants that like a more stable environment still there, and you get a greater species richness. The more plant species you have, the more animal species you have. The more species overall that you have that can interact with each other and with the environment, the stronger the community is. So the key point, as I have on the screen, is that disturbance is a common event rather than an exceptional event, and it is a beneficial event rather than a harmful one. And this is the end of the community ecology chapter.